love is this, oh my soul, my soul? What wondrous love is this, oh my soul? What wondrous love is this that caused the Lord of bliss to bear the dreadful curse for my soul, for my soul, to bear the dreadful curse for my soul.
Hello, Pastor Gavin Whitcomb, Sr. here. Welcome to Old Testament Survey. We're going to be looking at the book of Malachi, the last book in the Old Testament, at least according to the way that we have them organized in our day and age. Okay, the book of Malachi, if you recall the history of the people of the southern kingdom of Judah, remember the Babylonians invaded them and carried them away captive to Babylon, and they were there for 70 years. And then a remnant of the people, I think about 50,000 Jews, returned to rebuild the temple and rebuild the city of Jerusalem. And so the book of Malachi kicks in where they have the temple rebuilt after the Babylonian captivity. So the book of Malachi contains the prophet's messages rebuking the sins of the Jews who lived in Israel after the Babylonian captivity, after the temple had been rebuilt. So Malachi sought to encourage obedience to God by reminding them that they would be blessed by the Lord if they would obey him. So the approximate date of its writing was like 450 to 424 BC. Now, one way to divide the book up into different segments, there are only 4 chapters, but I would say there are 7 major divisions. Okay, so first he addresses the lack of honor towards God, rebuked. Then chapter 2, the sins of the priests are rebuked. Then the second part of chapter 2, unlawful divorce is rebuked. And then in chapter 3, he touches on the coming of the Messiah and his messenger. And then there's further unfaithfulness that's rebuked. The people were failing to tithe and honor the Lord with their tithes and their offerings. And then there were some stout, harsh words against God that some of the people were saying. And there's some encouragement then for the faithful remnant. And then in chapter 4, he talks about the coming day of the Lord, which involves, Christ and his second coming. So in Malachi chapter 1, he's talking about their sin. And he said, a son honors his father and a servant his master. If then I be a father, in other words, if I'm your father, where is my honor? And they were not honoring the Lord. He says, if I be a master, where's my fear? In other words, where's my respect? You claim that I'm your master. Where's the respect? Saith the Lord of hosts, unto you, O priests, that despise my name. And you say, wherein have we despised thy name? Well, here's what was going on. The people were not honoring the Lord when it was time to bring an offering. If they had a sheep or a cow or some animal that was crippled or blind or had some defect, that's what they would offer to the Lord as a sacrifice. So he says, you offer polluted bread on my altar. Wherein have we polluted thee, you say? Well, that you say the table of the Lord is contemptible. If ye offer the blind for sacrifice, is it not evil? And if ye offer the lame and the sick, is it not evil? And then he says, try serving that to your governor. Would he be pleased with it? So, that they were putting themselves before God, right? And it's interesting. He says in chapter 1, verse 11, from the rising of the sun, even to the going down of the same, my name shall be great among the Gentiles. For my name shall be great among the heathen. the heathen or the Gentiles. And so you and I who are not Jews, we're not Israelites, we're Gentiles, it is true now that from the rising of the sun to the going of the same, people from all around the world, Gentiles, are worshiping the true and living God, and his name is great among the Gentiles. So that's an amazing prophecy there. So in verse 13, they're saying, oh, this things we have to offer the Lord, behold, what a weariness is it. You brought that which is torn and the lame and the sick. Thus you brought an offering. Should I accept this of your hand, saith the Lord? And so, he's rebuking them, that half-hearted service. And, in chapter 2, he says, you guys, you priests, you ought to be ashamed. He says, you ought to be like your father Levi. The Levitical priesthood, the priest tribe of Levi from which the priests came. He says, he feared me. The law of truth was in his mouth, and iniquity was not found in his lips. He walked with me in peace and equity, and did turn many away from iniquity. And he said, you priests, you're departed out of the way. So get back on the right track, in essence. And then there's another thing that he rebuked, and that was unlawful divorce, even among the priests. Judah hath dealt treacherously. An abomination is committed in Israel and in Jerusalem. For Judah has profaned the holiness of the Lord, which he loved, and hath married the daughter of a strange god. What's it mean to marry the daughter of a strange god? Well, they're marrying heathen women. In other words, women that worship strange gods. Strange means foreign. Daughters of foreign gods you would marry. What they were doing, they were divorcing their wives and marrying heathen, pagan, idol-worshipping women. So he says in verse 12, the Lord will cut off the man that doeth this. So God's going to judge the one that does this. The master, meaning the teacher, and the scholar, in other words, the student. And out of the tabernacles of Jacob, and him that offereth an offering unto the Lord of hosts. So even the priests, if you're doing this, God's going to deal with you. This you have done again, covering the altar of the Lord with tears, with weeping, and with crying out. Now, how were they covering the altar with tears and weeping and crying out? Well, their wives that they were dumping. They dumped their wives to marry false women who were worshipers of false pagan gods. And so he says, you're covering the altar of the Lord with tears, with weeping, and with crying out, insomuch that he regardeth not your offering anymore, or receiveth it with goodwill at your hand. In fact, with your attitude and what you're doing, I don't even want you to offer any offerings to me. Yet ye say, wherefore? Why? Because the Lord hath been witness between thee and the wife of your youth, against whom you have dealt treacherously. You've dealt like a traitor to the wife of your youth. Yet is she thy companion, and the wife of thy covenant. Look what you did. You dumped her to marry these women who were followers of false gods. Didn't he make one? Didn't God make 2 one? Yes. And why? Why did he make 2 one flesh? That he might seek a godly seed. One of the purposes of your marriage was that maybe God would raise up godly children. Therefore take heed to your spirit, and let none deal treacherously against the wife of his youth. For the Lord, the God of Israel, saith that he hateth putting away. Putting away means divorce. So God hates divorce. For one covers violence with his garment, saith the Lord. Therefore take heed to your spirit, that you deal not treacherously. And so he's rebuking these unbiblical divorces. And God hates divorce, he says here. Now, Malachi chapter 3 There's a reference to Jesus and to John the Baptist. He says, "Behold, I will send my messenger, and he shall prepare the way before me. And the Lord whom ye seek shall suddenly come to his temple, even the messenger of the covenant whom ye delight in. Behold, he shall come, saith the Lord of hosts." And so, here the Lord talks about coming in judgment. And then later on in chapter 3, he rebukes them because they were supposed to tithe. They were to give 1/10 of all they made to the Lord, and they were failing to do that. And so he rebukes them for that as well. And in chapter 4, he, at the end of chapter 3, let me just read to you here what he says. "The Lord spake often one to another, and they that feared the Lord spake one to another, and the Lord hearkened and heard it, and a book of remembrance was written before him for them that feared the Lord, and that thought upon his name." In other words, God was going to make a written record of those who fear him and that think about him and honor him. And he says, "And they shall be mine, saith the Lord of hosts, in that day when I make up my jewels, and I will spare them as a man spareth his own son that serveth him." So in other words, when I gather my people together who are my treasure, they're going to be listed among those whom I treasure. They're going to be considered my jewels. And one day I'm going to gather them together to be mine. So it's kind of a cool verse there. So in chapter 4, he talks about the coming of the Lord. "Behold, the day cometh that shall burn as an oven, and all the proud, all that do wickedly, shall be stubble. And the day that cometh shall burn them up, saith the Lord of hosts, that it leave them neither root nor branch." So, judgment is coming, pertaining to the second coming of Christ. "But unto you that fear my name shall the Son of Righteousness arise with healing in his wings. And you shall go forth and grow up as calves of the stall." In other words, like young, healthy cattle. "And you shall tread down the wicked. There'll be ashes under the soles of your feet in the day that I shall do this, saith the Lord of hosts." So that's basically, the book of Malachi. Feel free to join us as we look into further questions and the answers and details in the after show. Thanks. Bye-bye.
What wondrous love is this, oh my soul, oh my soul? What wondrous love is this, oh my soul? What wondrous love is this? Here comes the Lord of bliss, to bear the dreadful curse for my soul, to bear the dreadful curse